Obviously, the biggest risk that Trump doesn't win the election is if he gets taken out. There could be another assassination attempt. Matt Gaetz, the congressman from the 1st Congressional District of Florida, did an interview on TV a couple of weeks ago saying that he was approached by a whistleblower from the Department of Homeland Security. If anything happens to Trump, I mean, the market is going to have a total meltdown. That's another reason why I want to buy, protection before the election rather than after the election. Right now, you can think about my S&P 500 put spread as a hedge against something bad to happen between Israel and Iran and something bad happening to Trump.
David Wu, CEO of David Wu Unbound, a global forum devoted to the promotion of fact-based debates about markets, politics, and economics, and certainly a friend of this show and someone my audience has requested time and time again, and our best performing guest to date. It is such a treat to welcome you back on the show. Great to see you as always, David. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. And gosh, David, I'm looking at the calendar and we are starting tomorrow, 2 weeks out from Election Day here in the US. And I know that's been a big part of our discussions. And I guess usually I start with the macro view. Maybe I will start with the macro view and we can get more into the politics because that does matter for the economy. So let's just step back and start with the big picture, that macro view, where we are today. And as you know, David, you can take all the time you need to set the table on this program.
Yeah, I think, I think as far as the global economy is concerned, I think, the U.S. is definitely steady as you go. Okay. I think, and I've been saying this for a while, which is that, it's true that labor market data had looked a tad soft, at the end of the summer. But I would argue a lot of it had to do with the fact that, the data did not really capture the effect of illegal immigration, right? Because in the U.S., it's a federal crime to hire an illegal worker. Therefore, no employer is going to be reporting their hiring of illegals to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Therefore, as a result, the non-farm payroll number, I thought was consistently undercounting the hiring of illegals, okay, in the economy. So if we were getting 150,000, we were probably getting, the real number was probably closer to 200,000. So the economy from that point of view, I think, was a lot stronger than I think people thought. And I think even in the unemployment rate, because as more and more illegal households basically make it into the so-called household survey of the conducted monthly by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to the extent illegals are much more likely to be unemployed, as they enter the labor force, as they enter into the survey, obviously, by definition, the unemployment rate will be going up. So what I'm telling you is that the U.S. economy is doing just fine. Doing just fine insofar that once you take into account of, the fact that illegals are finding work and they're consuming and so on and so forth, the economy is growing at 3%. By the way, if anybody has any doubt about it, all they have to do is just look at retail sales numbers. Because, as I said, illegals are unlikely to be captured by labor market surveys. Their income is likely to be captured by, basically tax reporting and so on and so forth because they don't pay any taxes. But they do have to spend money to the extent they have to eat, they have to buy things, they have to live. Therefore, retail sales, which covers everybody, illegals and legals, that gives you a much better barometer of how the economy is doing. And, retail sales, once again, last month was basically blew the forecast out of the water. So I think from that point of view, I think the U.S. economy is doing just fine. I think in contrast, I think the Chinese economy is doing very poorly. And I think everything they've thrown at the economy, in terms of stimulus over the last 3 weeks, in my view, is too little and too late. It's actually very funny because, this is because the Chinese usually, I think in the past, they tend to basically do a lot and then say very little. This time, they were very loud, in terms of the noise they were making. But what they actually did was very modest. Okay. And I think that, at the end of the day, all they did was you cut the mortgage rate by 50 basis points. You think that's going to basically move the needle? And then, and to the extent deposit rates are not being cut, what this means is essentially an income transfer, okay, from the banks to the households. And then we're not even talking about that much money. The reality is that, people talk about the U.S. facing huge debt and deficit. China is today facing huge debt and deficit. China's total debt as a share of GDP, which is around 260%, is about the same as that of the US. We're talking about if you add up public and private debt together, and they're running a budget deficit actually a little bit bigger than that of the US this year. So I think what is going on here, if you look at the two largest economies in the world, China and the US is still doing pretty well, ironically. And even though everybody's been predicting the U.S., is about to go into recession, that this is not sustainable, so on and so forth, was China, which everybody keeps saying, well, it's underperforming, but it's going to turn around, so on and so forth, remains an underperformer story. And I think from the economic standpoint, these are the two big stories. Of course, if you think about the third largest economy in the world, of course, is the Eurozone. And what is happening in Europe, which is very interesting, is the fact that the rivalry between the US and China is taking a huge toll on the biggest economy in Europe, which is Germany, right? I mean, it's actually very interesting because the Chinese, as you know, now face like 100% tariff when they want to sell, electric vehicles into the US. And yet they have built up, 350, brands, and too much spare capacity in terms of producing these things. So as a result, the government in China is trying to push the Chinese people to buy Chinese-made cars, Chinese cars. As a result, Volkswagen, which is the largest car manufacturer in the world, which happens to be also the largest car manufacturer in China, has lost its basically number one market share to actually BYD. And meanwhile, Chinese cars are pouring into Europe, into Germany's own market. So as a result, Europe, you have to remember, it's not like the US, but in Europe, the auto industry accounts for 8% of GDP. 16 million people work for the auto industry. They pay something like 400 billion euros worth of taxes and 50 billion euros worth of, essentially trade surplus. What is really going on is that the global trade war between the US and China is now definitely pushing Germany ever closer towards, from a manufacturing recession to a manufacturing depression. And that is very deflationary. And that, of course, is the reason why the European Central Bank cut interest rate this week and the euro tumbled. So I think all in all, I think, that's the situation. The situation is that the US is still doing pretty well. China's doing very poorly. And then Europe is getting hurt very badly by basically this rivalry between US and China. And that's why everybody is got their eyes set on the US election, in the hope that perhaps this very aggressive foreign policy under Biden is not going to continue under Trump, because ultimately there's not going to be any winner.
Mm-hmm. Before I get into the election, let me just quickly ask you, if the US is doing okay, stable, steady, why did the Fed cut rates then? Why was that necessary?
Listen, I thought, I would argue it was a mistake. I would argue it probably has something to do with the election. Listen, at the end of the day, whether it had anything to do with the election or not, we'll never know for sure. By the end of the day, we know that Trump does not want to, Trump has said that he's not going to reappoint Powell. And we know there are a lot of, Democrats on the FOMC voting members. And, so anything's possible. But what is very clear is that, once again, I think even the Fed did not understand what I just told you, because the Fed said, well, we cut 50 because labor market, we're showing clear signs slowing. And I just told you, if the labor market was slowing, it was because the labor market data failed to capture the reality of the labor market, which is that there are many more illegals finding work. And therefore, the labor market is probably not that basically slow. And I think this is very key, Because again, these guys are making policies based on data. Unfortunately, they haven't got the full picture. But yet, you know what, Julie, I think the important thing is this. I mean, this is why, because if you think about the numbers, just think about the numbers for a second. Now, a lot of your viewers are necessarily like Wall Street professionals, whatever. But even those of you who are investing at home, let me just throw up some simple numbers that you can even understand what I'm talking about, right? So, over the last 3.5 years, there have been 10 million, essentially the encounters with the illegals crossing the borders with the U.S., Border Patrol. So 10 million people, these are the people we know that definitely crossed the border. I mean, there are some others across the border who did not encounter Border Patrol. So we don't know how many are the totality in terms of the total number of people. But let's just say 10 million people. Now, these 10 million people, the majority of them are working age adults. Okay? In other words, they crossed the border in search of work. Let's assume that 80% of them, came to the U.S. to look for a job. In other words, that's 8 million people. Now you say, okay, fine. So 8 million people suddenly enter the U.S. labor force. You have to ask yourself, is that a big number or a small number? Well, let's think about this, right? The total labor force in the U.S. is only 160 million. Okay. So 8 million is 5% of the entire labor force. Which is to say that if these people just suddenly show up and they haven't got a job, if you have to add them to the unemployment rates, because, the Bureau of Labor Statistics defines anybody who's looking for a job as part of the labor force, whether he or she is working or not. As long as he's looking for a job, it's part of the labor force. What that means is if the unemployment rate was at 3.5%, all of a sudden, you could just add 5% to that number, and the real unemployment rate is 8.5%. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So when when the unemployment rate went from 3.5% to 4.1%, and the Fed was freaking out, they were saying, oh, wow, the labor market is slowing so much. The reality, as I told you before, even just a small number of these legals make it into the household survey conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month, you would get that basically move. It's from 3.5 to 4.1 is nothing. It says nothing about how Americans are doing in this economy. So what I'm telling you is that this is why I was rather disappointed that the Fed, couldn't see something as obvious as that. And as I said to you before, this is why, at a certain level, I can understand because they don't want to get into this legals versus illegal business because it's a political hotcake. They cannot exactly they can't just say, well, we're going to conduct monetary policy only for Americans for the illegals, and then that gets them into hot water. And I think as a result, they just said, you know what, we're going to do that. Mm-hmm. But what I'm telling you is that, again, it makes no sense. So this is why I think it was a mistake. And obviously, because of what I'm telling you is that the Fed decided to cut 50 because illegals were driving up the unemployment rate. All I know is that there's going to be potentially a big difference between Trump versus Kamala Harris, because under Trump, illegals are going to become even more unemployable. There could be even deportation, which means the Fed might actually will not be able to cut rates as easily. Under Kamala Harris, we might get more illegals into the country, which might drive up the unemployment rate even more quickly, which allows the Fed to cut rates more aggressively. So the irony is that, this is basically, investment 101. Yeah, Trump is probably bearish for bonds, and then Kamala Harris is bullish for bonds.
This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Public.com has just announced its new bond account, offering a 6.6% yield on your investment until 2028 when the first bond matures. Here's why it's interesting. Bond yields have been at their highest levels since 2009. However, the Fed just announced its first rate cut and more are on the table. In fact, current estimates from the CME FedWatch suggest rates may fall as low as 3% by the end of 2025. The good news, investing in a diverse portfolio of corporate and high-yield bonds could lock in today's historically high yields, even if the Fed cuts rates. That's why Public.com created the bond account. It's a new way to invest in bonds and earn a 6.6% yield on your investment for the next 4 to 5 years. Go to public.com/Julia to learn how to lock in a historically high yield on your portfolio. The bond account, only at public.com/Julia. All right, let's step back in from the lens of an economist. And you've been someone, I will point out for this audience, you nailed the 2016 election outcome. I believe there was even like a standing ovation at Bank of America on the trading floor for you for that call. I think you were probably one of the only economists on Wall Street at the time. You basically nailed the outcome of the 2020 election. You have been very on point on this program as well with some of your calls. So let's kind of step back from that economic lens. How are you thinking about the election? We're just 2 weeks out. We're 15 days away at this point.
I think, first of all, I want to basically, before we get into the election, I want to just basically say that obviously, like right now, the election is actually not the only thing, okay, on the radar. There is the Middle East also on the radar.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I happen to live in Israel now, and I'm in Jerusalem right now, and I'm, in the middle of the war zone. And I think it's very important to understand this because, like, you know what? So, I mean, I think, as you know, I've been saying on this show that I think Trump is going to win this election unless he doesn't make it to the election day. Okay. Because, but again, my view right now is that he's going to win. And so that hasn't changed. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But to me, and then there's no doubt, like if Trump were to win, this means, higher rates, higher US dollar, and high equities, right? All that, I think most people will talk more about that. But that, I think, generally has become the consensus now because under Trump, we're going to see more deregulations. We're going to see potentially tariff against China. We're going to see, most likely we're going to see a clean sweep in Washington. So from that point of view, Republicans are going to control not only the presidency, both House of Congress, which is certainly my central scenario. So which means easier fiscal policy or not. So no doubt Trump means higher rates, okay, higher stocks and higher US dollar. Now you think, okay, fine. So if you look at the other, event that we've got, which is the coming Israeli attack on Iran, right? Which I think is going to happen very soon, maybe as early as this week, because this is actually very important. I can tell you there's nobody in Israel who doesn't think that Israel is going to attack Iran before the election. I mean, let's just put it that way, okay? In fact, there was a Washington Post article last week that made a lot of wave in the U.S., which quoted a bunch of senior U.S. officials. This was after Biden and Bibi Netanyahu spoke on the phone. And one U.S. official pretty much declared that Israel is going to attack Iran before the U.S. election. Okay. Which to me basically meant that the U.S. either has agreed to Israel striking Iran before the election or that Biden feels like he's got no choice. So he simply agreed to accept that as a given. But for whatever it's worth, I think Israel is going to attack Iran before the U.S. election. Now, there's no doubt. If Israel were to attack Iran before the U.S. election, whether it's going to be this week or next week, whatever, that means lower rates, lower stocks. I don't know what's going to happen to the dollar, but certainly high oil price. Okay. So you could argue that the Iran trades and the Trump trades are opposing trades. Right? You get that? Right? So if you think Trump is going to win, you sell oil, right? Because you say, well, Trump is going to drill and drill and drill. If you think that Israel is going to attack Iran before, you might want to buy oil first. So from that point of view, I think this is what I think, there is a dichotomy right here. We have a U.S. election coming up, but, Israel apparently is going to get ahead of the U.S. election to attack Iran for a reason we can discuss. Mm-hmm. And then, so from that point of view, right now, I would argue that Wall Street, because over the past couple of weeks, we've seen rates going up, dollar going up, and, the stock market going up, all of which is telling me that the market is starting to warm up to the idea of a second Trump term. But what I would argue is that, hold your horses, as much as I've been the biggest, cheerleader of a second Trump term, I think, right now in the short term, I think the whole Trump trades could be blown out of the water if Israel were to attack Iran, because I don't think people have thought through what does that really mean, Israel attacking Iran. But we can talk about each of these two issues sort of in turn, because I think, this is very important.
Okay, I think that is really important. Let's talk about that, especially you point out you are in Israel. You sit there, you have a really important perspective to share that we don't have over here. Explain the reason again. Okay, get into the reason why. I want to understand that. And then, making folks aware of this scenario as well, that, as you pointed, could blow the Trump trade out. That seems to be moving more into the consensus moving in that direction on Wall Street. Let's start with the why.
Yeah. So first of all, if you recall, I can tell you this was personal experience. I mean, Iran attacked Israel 2 weeks ago. Okay. I mean, they launched 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. I can tell you it was a horrible experience. My family and I and my 2 dogs, we were hiding out in our shelter, for over an hour. 2 hours, actually. My dogs were totally traumatized. In my case, let's put it this way. I live in a little tiny village, okay, in the foothills of Jerusalem. This is not a particularly population. This is not a very dense, population center, okay? I think, all throughout this war so far over the past year, I've been using the shelter a couple of times. But let me tell you, that day, I could hear the explosions in the air extremely loud. It was very, very loud, okay? And again, these missiles, okay, hit Israel, and they could have killed hundreds of people, maybe thousands, if it hadn't been for Israeli air defense system. Biden is bragging about the fact that U.S. stepped up to play and helped Israel basically take down these missiles. Let me tell you this, the U.S. helped take down exactly 8 of these missiles, okay? 8 out of 200 was nothing, okay? But what I'm telling you is that it was a very scary experience. And there is no way Israel is going to let that stand, okay? So from that point of view, Israel needs to retaliate, hit back, because otherwise, they're going to assume that, if they can get away with this, they're going to keep hitting Israel. And this is no joke. There's another aspect to this, which I think is also very important, which is that over the summer, when Kamala Harris was surging in the poll, okay? People like Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was busy telling the Iranians, keep your head down. You don't want to attack Israel because, if you attack Israel, Israel will have to hit back. And then all that is going to do is going to help Trump. So it's actually very interesting because, as you probably know, Iran is not afraid of anybody in the whole entire world, except for a man by the name of Donald J. Trump, right? Because Trump basically ordered the assassination of Soleimani, which was the most senior Iranian general. Okay, Trump basically imposed the most, essentially the biggest and the most painful sanctions on Iran. So Iran does not want to see, believe me, Iran does not want to see Trump return. Okay, and from that point of view, all through the summer, when they were being told that Kamala Harris is doing well, you want to basically keep your heads down, and then so not to help Trump in any way. I think they went with it. But 2 weeks ago, I think, you have to be an idiot to not see the writings on the wall, because the polls were clearly showing that Kamala Harris was losing momentum in the poll. And then for a lot of different reasons, it became a very close race. And I would argue by now that even Trump is now leading Kamala Harris in all 7 swing states, right? If you look at poll averages right now. But the point is, I think when Iran decided to strike Israel, 2 weeks ago, it was probably partly influenced by their realization that Trump is likely to win anyway, okay? And that, I think, is very, very important. Now, you say, okay, fine. So if Iran thinks Trump is going to win, so what are they going to do? Big deal. So they hit Israel, and what else? Think about this. Even Anthony Blinken has admitted that Iran is only 1 to 2 weeks away from building a nuclear bomb, if they so chooses to, okay? That is that they have enough enriched uranium. It will take them only a couple of weeks to bring it up to 99% purity to make one bomb. Now, let's think about this. If Iran has spent the last 20 years building a bomb, and their biggest nemesis, Donald J. Trump, could very well return to the White House as commander-in-chief, you could argue if Iran becomes totally convinced that Trump is going to when on November 5th, Iran may just very well make a run for nuclear immunity, meaning that they might decide, let's go make the bomb now, because this is going to be our best insurance against Trump. You understand? Mm-hmm. Because North Korea has a nuclear bomb, and nobody has done anything to North Korea because they've got a nuclear bomb. So what I'm telling you is that this is why last week, a lot of experts were commenting on, not even an earthquake in Iran. There was an earthquake in Iran that registered 4.5 Richter scale magnitude. That was 10 kilometers deep. That was not that far from a nuclear, essentially, development center. And guess what? Many experts think that could have been a nuclear test. Okay. So what I'm telling you is that given the circumstances, it's impossible for Israel not to take action against Iran right now. Okay. So from that point of view, this is not something like, maybe Biden can, strong arm, Israel to stand down, whatever. This is a situation that is truly existential. This situation, because you have to remember this whole entire war that Israel's been fighting in the north and the south, against Houthis, against, Hamas, against Hezbollah. These proxies of Iran are all just doing Tehran's bidding. And then Iran is trying to use these proxies to stop Israel from for preventing Israel from crossing that nuclear, threshold. And Israel, now having taken care of Hamas and to some extent Hezbollah, now is ready and has no choice but to go for the kingpin. And that's what this is about.
Got it. Let me ask you on the timing, why before the election, or is that just kind of your point of just curious about the timing of it and the thought process?
There's several things involved here. First of all, I told you, there was a Washington Post article that came out about a week ago that quoted a U.S. official saying that Israel is going to attack Iran before the U.S. election. So that is very important, because you would think that, if Biden was against, obviously we all know that Biden and certainly Harris has an incentive to stop Israel from attacking Iran before the election, right? Because certainly an attack on Iran by Israel, which will trigger a regional war just like that. By the way, we're not going to be talking about this kind of I hit you once and then you're going to wait 3 weeks before you hit me back. This is going to be start of a war. Okay. So clearly Biden and Harris have a very strong incentive to stop Israel from essentially attacking Iran before the election. And yet, U.S. official, again, unnamed senior U.S. official close to the matter said that Israel is going to attack Iran before the U.S. election. And that tells me that the U.S., whether for whatever reason, has agreed, okay, the timetable, okay, first of all. Secondly, from an Israeli standpoint, I don't think the Israelis quite trust the Biden administration. Just yesterday, by the way, I don't know if you saw the news, just yesterday, this is everywhere, right? There was, essentially, Israel obviously has been preparing, okay, for the strike. And the strike plan, guess what, was leaked by the Pentagon to the Iranians that show up in some Iranian website yesterday. So actually, now the Republicans are in fact demanding an investigation into this, alleged leak, which is probably not so alleged because, apparently we now know it came out of, the Biden White House. So what I'm telling you, but this is nothing new. I can tell you, having lived in Israel, and I'm an American, okay? I can tell you, cannot even tell you how many times it's happened over the past year that Israel will share some, intelligence with the U.S. only to find out in a newspaper somewhere in the U.S. or somewhere else, basically, 40 hours later. So the Israelis do not trust the Biden administration at all. Okay. And they also know that right now Biden has to play nice. Kamala Harris has to play nice with Israel before the U.S. election, because the majority of American public supports Israel. Okay. They know that after the election, during the so-called lame duck session, which is between the election day and the inauguration day, Biden can decide to basically stick it to Israel because he no longer has to worry about the election and public opinion, so on and so forth. So from that point of view, Israel, in my humble opinion, understands this. Therefore, to the extent there is total lack of trust in the Biden administration, that I think Israel might decide to go for it. So my view is it's going to happen before the election. Now, of course, and this is why I say this week, because there are 2 weeks left between now and the election. I don't think if Israel can help it, I think Israel will try not to attack Iran in the week leading up to the US election, because that would be like literally rubbing the face of Kamala Harris, right? I mean, because no doubt, an attack is going to help Trump, right? Because Trump is going to be able to make the case that this was another failure of Biden's policy, especially given, Biden handed over billions of dollars to Iran over the last 3.5 years. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Even these are well-documented numbers that 3 years ago, Iran was only exporting 200,000 barrels of oil per day. And because Biden decided not to enforce existing sanctions on Iran last month exported 1.8 million barrels per day of oil. And so Biden has really replenished the coffer of Iran that has allowed Iran to basically, to fund its proxies, to carry out terrorist act, and then to attack Israel, of course. So my point here is that I think Israel is going to try to avoid attacking Iran in the final week leading up to the US election, which means that what we've got is this week.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, David, because you have a lot of high profile clients and your job at the end of the day is to help them make money and think about these trade setups and scenarios. And you mentioned there's the trade of the Trump trade where you should be selling oil, but then there's this other trade where it would cause oil to go up. Can we just step back? I want to just unpack a little bit more these kind of two opposing trades. Let's just explore those a bit further. How are you talking to clients about these scenarios and how they should be preparing their portfolios?
Yeah. I think the way I think about this is pretty simple. Okay. You find cheap hedges, okay, when they're around. So I'll give an example. Right now, like, for example, right? I mean, people, professional investors, they use options, okay, as a way, as an insurance, right? To hedge against, certain risk or situation is also unforeseen events. Now, I can tell you right now, it's actually very interesting. Right now, because the US stock market is so it's been practically going up every week for the last, I don't know how many weeks, and earnings been good, and people are starting to warm up to the idea of a Trump presidency, deregulation, tax cuts, and all that. So as a result, actually, short-dated equity volatility is very low. Sure, for the election day itself, volatility is very high. Like VIX is still trading around 18, but VIX, remember, it's a 1-month contract. Okay, it covers the next month, and that month covers the U.S. election. Now, what you find is that if you actually have access to 1 week data or 2 week data, so pre-election, okay, data. Pre-election volatility, you'll find it is dirt cheap. It's crazy. So right now, the way I'm doing this is to say, you know what? I think my view is that Israel is going to attack Iran and before the U.S. election. And I think if that happens, you're talking about lower S&P 500, lower rates, lower dollar, and higher oil price. Now I look around, I say, well, listen, actually, if I want to buy a put option on oil, very expensive right now because volatility in oil is very, very high. And rates, I don't really know. So I bought myself, literally right now, I bought myself a 2-week put spread, okay, on S&P 500, okay, which will give me a 4-to-1 payoff if S&P just goes down 2%. Now, without going into too much of technicality of how this works, and then obviously if you're a professional, you know, if you're not, you wouldn't. But the point here is to say that I am basically hedging against a potential pullback in US stocks before the election. Okay. Just before the election. Okay. For that reason. Now, of course, I also think, well, I could be wrong, right? I mean, who knows? Israel might decide to not do it, or wait until after the election, or then in general, whatever. I mean, you know, nothing in life is with 100% certainty. So you say, okay, fine. So you think that Trump is going to win. So what do you do? Now, there are a lot of things you can do. You can buy stocks, you can whatever. I happen to like buying the US dollar against the RMB as my ultimate Trump trade. Okay. Because, you know, for lots of different reasons, like I think the Chinese economy is really in a very, very bad shape. I think China needs to do QE, actually. I think the only way out for China is to do quantitative easing, which is what the US did after the collapse of Lehman, right? I mean, and I think in many ways, China needs it more than anything else, okay? Because China is sitting a lot of debt, the economy is not growing, and what they need is simply do QE in order to really reduce the debt servicing burden for the entire economy that's sitting on a lot of debt. Okay, that's probably the only way out in my view. And if they do that, that means a weaker RMB. I'm also thinking there's something else. And by the way, this is something very important. Because now everybody's talking about Trump trades, Trump trades, Trump trades. Now, there's a difference between what I call perception trades versus reality trades, right? Perception trades will do very well during the lame duck session, right? Assuming Trump wins, okay? Basically, on November 5th, everybody is going to be talking, oh, wow, how am I going to basically make money in 2025, right? So nobody knows what Trump is going to do exactly, but everybody's going to guess, and nobody's going to want to give him the benefit of doubt. So every bank, from Goldman Sachs, Citibank, JP Morgan, Bank of America, all of them, I guarantee you, they're all going to say, oh, well, Trump is going to come in with tariffs. He's going to raise inflation. He's going to blow, a lot of that stuff is going to happen. So everybody, however, I can tell you, professional investors, that's what they do for a living. They wait around every year. Every year, they all know that sometime just before or after Thanksgiving, okay, all the big Wall Street banks produce their year ahead reports with their top 10 trades for the next year. And they know that these, especially hedge fund guys, they know that real money guys, meaning like mutual funds, that sort of thing, they're going to be winding down their books like before year end, right? They're going to be waiting until January to put on these trades. So hedge fund guys, they try to get an early start by jumping on these, the recommended trades in late November and December. These are what I call perception trades, okay? Because they have nothing to do with reality. What will Trump do? Nobody really knows for sure. I can speculate, but I don't think it will be quite as obvious as it's going to be painted, in these year ahead reports. But nevertheless, I can imagine everybody's going to say Trump is going to impose a 60% tariff on China because Lighthizer said so. And Lighthizer, who, as you know, was Trump's former chief trade negotiator, who could very well, who's in the running to become the next Treasury Secretary, by the way, although I think he's more qualified as Commerce Secretary. And he's telling every visitor from Wall Street, okay, that, yeah, Trump is going to come in and he's going to start raising tariff on China like immediately. So it's not going to be like, he's basically making it sound like Trump is going to be inaugurated on January 22nd, and the next day, tariff on China is going to go to 60%. And a lot of people want to believe that. But we won't know true or false, whether it's real or not until, January 22nd, until Trump has got in, assembled a team, his cabinet has been appointed. We don't really know. But what I'm telling you is that there is no doubt everybody. So I'm trying to get a head start. I know the next 3 months, everybody's going to go crazy about, well, Trump is going to declare trade war on China. And then, if you really believe that, then you think RMB is going to weaken because everybody's going to be out there selling the RMB. Everybody and their grandmother. So again, right now, I don't want to get into the sort of the fundamental trade, the reality trade about Trump, because I think a lot is riding on who's going to be Secretary of Treasury, for example. I don't think it's going to be Jamie Dimon. I suspect it's not going to be a Lighthizer either. If it's going to be a Scott Bessent, he could turn out to be a moderate who is a sort of a reasonable guy. And then I don't think a lot of this sort of crazy things people are saying about what Trump is going to do. I think actually I don't see any logic for that. And I don't think Trump is going to fall for the easy stuff. But the point here is that I'm long the dollar against the RMB as my ultimate Trump trades, because I think everybody's going to basically step all over themselves to be selling RMB against the US dollar. But I'm buying a very short dated protection against a potential, blowout, basically a war in the Middle East. But if that war really does happen, then I would be looking to do stuff. I mean, for example, I'm bearish oil medium term. So if oil were to spike up to 100, I would be probably looking to sell oil. Okay. If stock market would have a big pullback, I'll probably come in and basically buy some. It all depends. But this war, let me tell you this, the world has not seen a war like this ever since the Second World War. I mean, this war between Israel and Iran is an extremely scary war because it is like, I mean, I can't even tell you like how scary it is. I mean, I happen to live here and then I talk about it as though like, this is a story. But let me tell you, it's not going to be a story, for people who live through this. Yeah. And then, a lot of things can go wrong. I mean, so many things can go wrong that I think the market in general is much too complacent about it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you bring up such a valid point. It's like, you're there, you're on the ground. Like you understand this. And it seems like a lot of folks don't. Like the market, as you point out, is quite complacent right now. So, yeah.
Because just think about this. I mean, people have to realize, like, you said, well, Iran, like, Iran, Israel is a tiny country. I mean, it's got 10 million people. You're talking about Iran that's like, I don't know, 50 times bigger, whatever it is. So you're talking about literally like a David versus Goliath situation. Okay. Iran is it's true that Iran doesn't have an air force, while at least doesn't have a decent air force. Iran and Israel does not have a border. They don't have a border. So from that point of view, like, Iranian infantry is not going to make a difference. I mean, they're not going to. So this is going to be fought in the air. And Iran has been preparing itself for this for the last 20 years. Iran is very good at two things. Okay. First of all, Iranian missiles are very good. Iranian ballistic missiles, like especially the new variety called the Fatah 110. This missile has a range of 300 kilometers. This missile can carry up to half a ton of explosives. Okay, which is a lot. This missile is equipped with precision guidance. These are the same missiles that Iran recently sent to Russia to be used against Ukraine, against NATO weapons. So let me tell you, these are very sophisticated missiles. They can do huge damage. When Iranian ballistic missile is fired, in Israel only has like 7 minutes to prepare. And by the way, people talk about the Israeli Iron Dome. Iron Dome is designed against rockets and maybe cruise missiles, definitely not against ballistic missiles. I mean, Israel has other system that is designed to deal with ballistic missiles. But again, Iran, if they're talking about firing like hundreds and maybe even thousands of them, this is going to be a massive thing, right? Also on top of that, Iran also is a world leader in drone technology, right? I mean, in fact, Iran has been supplying drones to Russia. I mean, as you probably read the news over the weekend, there was a drone that attacked the residence of the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. Actually, it was an Iranian drone that was launched by Hezbollah that was able to fly so low it managed to detect, avoid the detection by the radar, and actually attacked the prime minister's residence. Just think about that for a moment. Yeah. I mean, luckily he wasn't home and, whatever, I'm just saying, like, you could imagine the situation. Now, of course, I happen to think that when Israel is going to go after Iran, it is going to do everything, okay, to seriously set back Iran's nuclear program. And that is going to be very, very dangerous and risky. And Iran might decide to, when you're pressed against the wall, you do desperate things. And that's what I'm saying. This war is, if I think about the US election versus this war, the US election is far more predictable than actually this war.
Yeah.
And so you tell me, which one do you think?
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's interesting, like the US election being far more predictable. And of course, like, I want to hear more on that. Like, you can look at the polls now too, and like they're definitely moving in Trump's favor. The betting markets certainly have, but I'm curious, like, what do you look at? Which polls do you give more weight to? Because, sometimes David, I'm like, I just don't know. I really don't know, like, what the outcome's going to be. I'm certainly not an expert, but
I think the way I look at this is to vary this, right? I mean, we all know, first of all, you're right. I mean, like, we should be very suspicious of polls because polls do such a bad job, right? I mean, the polls got the last two elections seriously wrong.
Yeah.
No, it's true that, most polls said that Biden was going to win. Sure. So he did win. But the margin they gave Biden was massive compared to the actual margin. The actual margin was razor thin. I mean, they all had New York Times, Reuters, they had Biden leading by 8 points, 10 points, whatever. It was crazy. I mean, in the final week in the run up to the election. So what I'm telling you is that all the pollsters' track record on the whole have been terrible. And the reason why, they've been terrible over the last two election cycles has a lot to do with, what's called in the industry, non-response bias. In other words, that Trump voters are less likely to take part in a survey. So therefore, any surveys, whether it's the New York Times, Economist, USA Today, CNN, when they try to do these randomized surveys, just calling up people and whatever, knocking on doors or whatever it is, they obviously want to get a representative sample of people to answer their surveys. But if Trump supporters consistently refuse to participate in surveys, or that they actually don't give you their truthful, answers about their voting intentions, then survey is going to be very wrong. Okay. And that's what's been going on in the last two cycles. Whether this is because Trump voters are too embarrassed to admit that they were going to vote for Trump, or that they're afraid to vote for Trump because they think that, or that they think that the prime information they're sharing with the pollsters could be somehow used against them in some way. So there are a lot of different reasons why Trump voters, are underrepresented in polls. Now, in 2020, a lot of pollsters claimed that they had, raised the weight of Trump voters to basically correct for this bias. But they were no more successful in 2020 than they were in 2016. In fact, actually polling errors was bigger in 2020 than 2016, mind you. Okay, so there were even more wrong in 2020 versus 2000. So the question really is, so how should we be looking at this? Now, the way I think about this is very simple. Maybe because I work on Wall Street, I tend to follow people who've been right? I mean, that's how you do it, right? I mean, my clients follow me because I have a track record of being more right than wrong. I mean, I think, when it comes to big calls, out of consensus calls, I don't think anybody else on Wall Street has the same track record as I do. And I mean, so my clients have to somehow put up with me because, some of them probably can't stand me, but they put up with me because for my track record. Now, when I look at the track record of different pollsters, it's very clear cut. Who's been the best, who hasn't been the best, right? So Real Clear Politics ranks all the pollsters according to their polling errors. And guess what? Among multi-state, pollsters, two survey companies have consistently, finished at the top of the ranking in the last two election cycles. And one is Insider Advantage, the other one's Trafalgar Group. Okay. And, both of these two, whatever, it doesn't really matter because, by the way, very often, the less known surveys are going to do better. Because like, imagine you're a Trump supporter and all of a sudden you get a phone call from CNN saying, New York Times, like you hate them, saying, well, we would like to basically conduct a survey and would you be, you're going to basically slam the phone on them. Whereas if there's some small outfit or whatever it is, you might be much more willing. So whatever the reason is, we're not going to go into there's a very complex, we can go into a complex discussion about polling methodology. But Insider Advantage and Trafalgar are my go-to polls in terms of like, what are they saying? And by the way, to the extent I don't care about national polls, because again, the US system is not won by a popular vote. We're talking about electoral college system where like the swing states, the battleground states are going to make all the difference in the world. So I tend to just follow what these two polls say about what the two candidates are doing in Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, and North Carolina.
Yep.
Now, my view is very simple. My view is that Trump, so generally speaking, both of these polls have Trump in the lead, okay, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in North Carolina, and in Michigan. By the way, Trump just has to win 3 of these 4 states to actually win the election, okay? Now, I can tell you, and then, so first of all, I look at polls that have been correct, over the last 2 election cycles, they're saying there's a pretty good chance Trump's going to win. Now, of course, it's true that his lead is still within the margin of error, but still, okay, he's in the lead. Now, and then you say momentum. Okay. What about momentum? Now, you say, well, the problem with momentum is that how you basically measure momentum. Okay. Because like a lot of people look at averages, but averages across polls is not a very accurate way to measure trend because you have a lot of polls with different frequencies of surveys. So what I tend to follow is Reuters. Reuters has had they've already done 6 different polls since, Biden quit the race. Okay. And then if I look at their polling, it is very clear that Kamala Harris was gaining on Trump all throughout August into September. She peaked at the 3rd week of September, and she's been coming down since. So what I'm telling you, I wouldn't give too much importance to what Reuters is actually saying in terms of like, oh, wow, Kamala Harris is leading Trump, that kind of thing. They're very biased. But in terms of the direction, it's very clear. Trump is regaining the momentum, and then the polls are both. And then you look at demographic groups, and this is the most interesting thing. And then this is why I think, there is something to be said about reports. The Democrats are somewhere between being concerned and freaking out. Okay. Because if you think about this, right? What are the key demographic groups in the US? Okay. So we know that Trump right now, Trump has seen a Trump already did very well with both blacks and the Latinos in 2020. I mean, he won more like Latino votes, more like black votes than any Republican presidential candidate since Richard Nixon already in 2020. And right now, this time, not only that he's seeing increased support among Latinos, but also among blacks, especially among black males. And that is very, very interesting. So what you just say, so imagine, Kamala Harris, okay, Kamala Harris is right now polling something like 78% among black voters, okay? Democrats historically get about 90% of black votes. And she's right now polling 78%, my friend. Just think about how crazy this is. So the two, minority groups, Kamala Harris is actually doing poorly, which makes the whole white female demographic group even more important than usual. Okay. And this is where it's going to be decided. A lot of people don't know this, but white females, okay, had historically voted Republican. In fact, over the last 78 years, that's almost 80 years, white females in the United States have voted only for 2 Democratic presidential candidates. That's the hell there. Even Trump won 52% of the white female votes in 2020. Okay. So, but this time is supposed to be different, right? Because Democrats think it's about abortion, right? So the idea is like, well, if this is about abortion, then, then Trump is going to lose the majority support of white females. But guess what? PBS, we're not talking about like Fox News. We're talking about PBS and NPR radio. These are government, basically news agencies. They recently released a poll, that shows that Trump is leading Kamala Harris by 13 points among white females without a college education, a degree. It's amazing. Okay. And then if you look at the white females with a college degree, the support for Kamala Harris is no higher than for men, white male with a college degree. In other words, actually, so far, I have not seen too much evidence suggesting that abortion is going to be a major issue. But the important thing is this. There are a lot of white females without a college degree in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. The two must-win states for Trump. Pennsylvania for sure. Okay? Mm-hmm. So what I'm telling you, this is why, I feel very good about where things stand right now for Trump. That's why I think, there's a 75% chance he's going to win.
75%. Okay.
75% because you never know.
So I was going to ask you though, David, the 25%, what's the contingency? Do you have a trade for a contingency? And how do you see that playing out or the scenario there? Because, a lot of folks are saying this is the most consequential election in our lifetime. So how do you think about the contingency?
Obviously the biggest risk, that Trump doesn't win the election is if he gets taken out, right? There could be another assassination attempt, and this time it could be successful. Who knows? I don't know if you saw this, but for what it's worth, and I have no reason to doubt this. Matt Gaetz, the congressman from the 1st Congressional District of Florida, did an interview on TV a couple of weeks ago saying that he was approached by a whistleblower from the Department of Homeland Security, who told him that U.S. intelligence agencies are aware of at least 5 different assassination teams out to kill Trump, including 3 foreign ones. Okay. So I think from that point of view, I think, this is not, it's not, I think, there's been 2 attempts on Trump, and supposedly they foiled a 3rd attempt last week. At least the sheriff basically says so. But the point here is that the reason why market reaction was muted was because, of course, Trump survived. Okay. If anything happens to Trump, and God forbid that they should kill him. The market is going to have a total meltdown. That's another reason why I want to buy, protection before the election rather than after the election. You know what I'm saying? Because before the election, that's when he's traveling. He has to go from rally to rally. There are many opportunities. So I'm definitely worried about that. And, again, it's one of these things. So right now you can think about my S&P 500 put spread as, as a hedge against something bad to happen between Israel and Iran and something bad happening to Trump.
Got it. Yeah. Well, David, we always enjoy having you on this channel. I have to thank the audience member who first suggested that we reach out to you, because I know the audience loves hearing from you, listening to you. You do have, at times non-consensus views and calls, but it's so important for folks to listen and learn. And you certainly have a track record of being on point. I want to give you the final few minutes here, and I appreciate you even going overtime with us, to let folks know where they can find more of your work. You have an amazing YouTube channel. Let them know more about David Wu Unbound, and any parting thoughts, anything that you want to leave this audience to think about in the coming weeks. The floor is all yours, David.
I want to just basically say, I think that's the most important thing about this election to me. If Trump wins, what does that really mean? Some people are going to say, well, he's going to be a dictator. That means we're going to, it would be democracy's over and so on and so forth. I would argue if Trump wins, forget about what Trump is going to do. If Trump wins, that to me suggests, and I think some people are going to hate it when I say this. I think there's a certain new maturity about the American voters. And what do I mean by that? The American voters today, maybe because of YouTube, maybe because of social media, whatever it is, they obviously very distrustful of mainstream media and so on and so forth. they distrustful politicians. These days, they are going to judge politicians by what they do as opposed to what they say. And I think that would be the most important thing. I think from that point of view, the days that a politician can win an election based on what he says is over. I mean, we all know Trump is a flawed character. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, nobody would argue with that, even among Republicans. But again, if he can get things done, and he does have a track record of getting things done in his first presidency, obviously COVID was an unfortunate thing, so on and so forth. You have to, to me, if Trump wins this election, it tells me Americans are now able and capable of reading between the lines, that they can tell the difference between a joke versus something serious, that they can look through the facade of a politician and get to a point. And I think that will make America great. And that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to basically say is this. If Trump gets reelected, there are two very good things going for him. First of all, because he won't be seeking reelection. Okay. That means he will actually have to do something good for the country. Because like all politicians, like presidents after the second year, all they think about is getting reelected. So from that point of view, Trump, this will be in some sense, it will be his last term, but in many ways, his first term as well. He can get a lot done without having to think about, oh, wow, listen, I have to get reelected, that kind of thing. So he could give his total focus to this next 4 years. The second thing that makes me very excited is the fact that Elon Musk, is going to play a very big part in this administration. I mean, let's put it this way. America is very good in private sector, but America sucks in government. Okay. Elon Musk is like a God's gift to America. I mean, listen, I don't say this lightly. I mean, the guy is obviously an excellent engineer, but he's an excellent entrepreneur. If he can put his mind to helping turn around the U.S. in terms of the government, the regulations, cutting basically wasteful spending, I mean, this is going to be amazing. I mean, you could be talking about a dream team, and then RFK is going to come in, hopefully do something about health, because all the obesity, diabetes problem. The problem in America is not global warming. The problem in America is obesity. All too many people eat very poorly. So as a result, Americans spend more money on healthcare than anybody else on the face of the planet. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here for America to really Trump. Maybe it's just basically fantasy, the fantasies in me talking, but I could almost imagine Trump assembling a dream team, a bunch of people with a proven track record, with ideas that they want to redo Washington. And in that sense, that gets me very, very excited, because I think, that's what America needs. That will be a new opening beginning. So people, give us some time, obviously, for the team to come together. But I think Trump is going to bring a very nice future for America. I mean, again, making America first means staying out of foreign wars and really trying to improve the lives of the little Americans, not about the billionaires, the trillionaires, whatever, about the little Americans. And I think that is what I'm looking forward to in the next 4 years. On that note, anyway, as you said, I've got a YouTube channel. Check it out, David Wu Unbound. Other than that, if you want to learn about my investment strategy, I've got a retail offering, at davidwuunbound.com. And it's still work in progress, but we're getting better and better.
David Wu, founder and CEO of David Wu Unbound. Thank you so much for joining us again and being so generous, as always, with your time, your knowledge, all of your wisdom. I appreciate you. And until next time, be well.
Thank you, Julia, for having me.